This is Monocle on Design Extra. It's a short show to accompany our weekly programme where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Ailey Evans. The mobile phone, an object that many of us carry around daily and depend on to stay connected to the world around us. The technology and hardware associated with these portable devices has dramatically changed over time. And it is this important history that the Mobile Phone Museum has been archiving and preserving, growing a collection of mobile technology heritage to share with the public. Journalist Sebastian Stevenson caught up with one of the museum's founders to find out more.
Take the phone out that you are listening to this report on and put it in front of you. If you are listening on something else, I know that phone is nearby. Ignore the notifications that have just come rushing in and just look at your phone. Actually look at it. It probably has a large touchscreen with one or no buttons and one camera. Turn it around on its back and it probably has at least 1 to 3 camera lenses. How did our phones come to look like this? The Mobile Phone Museum, set up by Ben Wood and Matt Chatterley in 2021, is an online archive, along with the occasional pop-up exhibition. The collection of mobile phone hardware shows us how we got to this point and the paths that we went down along the way. The charity also goes to schools and shows the next generation what is possible for this device.
The business of living involves communicating, which often means conversing. And in today's active mobile world, conversing more and more...
Ben Wood talks through some of the devices in the collection. We start by looking at the very first mobile phones available to the market, which weren't very mobile at all.
So, to paint a picture, we're sitting here surrounded by an extraordinary diversity of designs, from some of the very first phones in the mid-1980s through to some of the cutting-edge phones from today. And the early phones were enormous devices. Think of a car battery with a handset attached to it. That's the kind of scale and weight you're thinking about. Around the mid-1980s, these phones were launched, and one particular phone we've got here is the Vodafone VT1, which is a very important phone because it was one of 2 devices that Vodafone launched at the beginning of 1985, and they went on to sell about 12,000 units of that device, and that's where it all began.
Now the telephone has evolved into the Vodafone. There's nothing unusual about seeing phones on the road. On lakes and rivers, they're an everyday occurrence. And in the middle of nowhere, a Vodafone.
These devices were extremely expensive when they were new, thousands of pounds. In fact, most people leased them rather than purchased them. And they were very much the domain of business people. There's obviously the kind of a stereotype of the yuppie and the financial person who carry phones around, but it was also for anyone who had a job that required mobility. If you think of someone like a builder who might be working on site and they can't get a landline there, it would mean they'd have to constantly go back to an office to order new materials or chat to an architect or chat to a customer. Alternatively, a plumber, for example, who would have to have someone waiting to take a phone call to say, I need my boiler fixed. That would only happen during the end of the day, or they'd have to pay someone to do that. They could take the phone with them and they'd always be contactable. So at this stage, it was very niche, very expensive. And the expectation was that only a few tens of thousands of mobile phones would ever be sold. Hopefully most people listening to this will know about the Nokia 3310. It's a true icon, and it was the phone that democratized the mobile phone for society. Mobile phones went from being extremely expensive devices to more affordable devices. Younger people were getting them. 3310 was a talk and text phone. It had basic features like the Snake game on it, which was very, very compelling. And it went on to sell 126 million units. And I think it's interesting because it is such a memorable phone, and it really did start that journey where the mobile phone became part of the fabric of society. It became this ubiquitous consumer electronics device that you couldn't live without. Everybody, I think, looks back on that with a certain amount of nostalgia and fondness, particularly if it's their first mobile phone. But something we see at the Mobile Phone Museum is people love it when they see a showcase of phones, and whether they're looking at them and saying that was my first phone, or that was my mum's first phone, or oh, I remember that, or I always wanted one of those. It's definitely a very, very iconic category from a design perspective.
Hello, Moto.
Well, of course, the introduction of the mechanical design was fascinating. So we went from these bar block phones to phones that had flips and folds, and phones that were slider phones that rotated, and that brought a whole new design element. Motorola pioneered the first flip phone. We saw slider phones from the Korean manufacturers like Samsung. We saw phones that twisted from people like Motorola, and we also saw a step towards mobile phones as fashion items. And in front of us, we have a whole collection of weird and wonderful devices, whether it's the iconic pink Motorola Razr, some of the Nokia products, the lipstick phone, which by virtue of its name looks a little bit like a lipstick. Other devices that had detailed fashion designs. There's a phone that was done in partnership with Dolce & Gabbana. A really exciting time, but also, funnily enough, phones getting much smaller. Now it's almost farcical to think that you had a phone that could fit in the palm of your hand or you could wear around your neck with tiny buttons and a tiny screen. But at that moment in time, in the kind of mid-late 1990s, that was what people wanted. We certainly these days live in what I call the sea of smartphone sameness. And that's a shame because obviously, I'm celebrating with the museum this amazing design diversity. But there are some interesting glimmers of hope. So, for example, we've started to see flexible display technology being used to offer foldable designs. So actually screens that fold. So we're going back to flip designs or phones that you can open out that become mini tablets. And who knows what will happen in future. We're seeing new pieces of technology. The smartwatch on your wrist has a screen that's bigger than some of the phones that we've got on the table in front of us. Smart glasses, could it be that we start to have an augmented world where some of the functions of the mobile phone are displayed, in our line of sight? Personally, I think we can think about a lot of those science fiction scenarios, but the smartphone as we see it today, and the iPhone in particular, have really defined a dominant design. And this has happened in lots of other areas, whether it's TVs or washing machines or cars. Over time, you hit a dominant design and that becomes very enduring. So perhaps this is an amazing window of design diversity and creativity, which ultimately gave us the smartphone. Personally, I think that the mobile phone is a very enduring device. It's found its place in society. People are very comfortable with the approach that we have now. You've seen a very iterative approach to phones over the last 15 years. They haven't changed that much. Every year they get a little bit better. And I think that's going to continue for quite some time.
For Monocle in Newbury, England, I'm Sebastian Stevenson.
Sebastian Stevenson there. That's all for this week. If you're eager for more design stories, listen to our main programme, Monocle on Design, airing on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. London time. Or if you prefer print, you can pick up a copy of Monocle magazine, available on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced by me, Maylie Evans. Thank you very much for listening.